Thank you very much for giving up your time to do the webinar this morning. This is the second webinar that the NUJ has run for chapel reps. And I know some of you are not chapel reps, which is absolutely fine, because I appreciate that in branches, some of you may be freelance. Some of the information that we will be talking about this morning will be useful for you as well. So I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping for the webinar. It's starting now. We will be finished no later than 12:30, depending on how many questions, comments, what people want to talk about will depend on kind of when we finish, really. I'm going to mute you all for the meeting while the officials are just talking, and then at the end, when we open it up and people can talk, you can just unmute yourselves and then you can just make any comments, any questions. If you want to share any experiences, then please do. There'll be plenty of time for you to do that. The organisers that are here today are going to be speaking for a short amount of time, just to kind of bring you up to date with what's going on in their sector, and then we're just going to open it up to you to be able to talk about what you want, really. So I'm going to mute you all now. You can unmute yourselves, as I say, when we come to the part at the end, when it comes to asking questions. So let me just go through a little bit of housekeeping. I've talked to you about the chat facility. Please do use that. If you have any comments, anything you want to say, please do put it up on the chat. I will be taking a note of everything that's said, and it will be recorded and put out afterwards. Also, this webinar is being recorded. So if you prefer not to have your faces exposed, if you don't want to have your videos on, then please don't have them on, just turn them off. That's absolutely fine. It also might save you some bandwidth as well, because I appreciate for some of you, you may well be competing for bandwidth in your home. So do whatever is useful for you, really. The session is aimed at chapel reps, but as I say, everybody's welcome. It doesn't matter whether you're a rep in a branch, whether you're a freelance rep, whatever, you're all welcome, because I'm sure there'll be lots of information here that will be useful for all of you. Each official is going to speak for no more than 5 minutes. Thank you to those of you that have given questions, and I have passed those questions on to the officials, so they will address those in when they do their presentation. Adam Christie, who is with us as well, welcome Adam, you're there somewhere, who is the chair of the NUJ's National Health and Safety Committee. He will also be doing a 5-minute presentation as well, and of course is available for questions and comments. Please be mindful of the NUJ rules on conduct, that no one will say anything that will be offensive or discriminatory throughout this webinar, please. I think that's about it. Anybody got any questions that they want to ask before we get started? Okay, if you want to just wait, if you've got your videos on, if you just want to wave your hands, then please do, and I'll see it if you want to say something. Otherwise, there is a reaction facility at the bottom here, at the bottom of your screen on the right, and if you just put the little hand wave up there, then I'll know that you want to speak. So I'll keep an eye out for that as we're going through this. So if I could ask Fiona, would you like to kick off, Fiona?
Yes, certainly. Good morning, everybody. If you haven't met me yet, I am the national organiser for magazines, books and PR. Much of the information in that I've mentioned today is sort of related to what's happening in those sectors, but I'm sure that a lot of it will be applicable across the industry. We're very much on the start of this sort of returning to work process, I think. Most of the employers that we're getting any sort of word out of about the potential for return to work at the moment, the general consensus seems to be there's no chance at the moment. Quite a few employers have actually made sort of confirmatory statements about their approach in this, which is that they're not in a hurry. Several employers have said they're not even considering the possibility until July of people returning to offices. And it's been very, very welcome wherever that sort of thing has been said by members. I think people feel reassured by that. That there's not going to be an unseemly hurry, and I think people are feeling feel reassured that this is going to be about taking the time to make the workplace safe before any consideration is given to getting people into it. Now, I'm going to make an obvious point now, and I'm not going to stick on it for long because I'm sure Adam will be dealing with this later. But part of that process, obviously, is risk assessing the safety of the workplace. I know quite a lot of people have been having sort of risk assessments for the home working part. There'll need to be another one when it comes to moving people back into the office, and the government's been quite clear about that should be a transparent process. It always should be fairly transparent. To be honest with you, you're always entitled to see the risk assessment that applies to your job. So if you're uncertain about whether that's happening in your chapel, that's something that can and should be asked for. I mean, it doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be some bloke with a clipboard walking around the office. A lot of people have been doing risk assessments at home, filling in forms, filling in, information about their needs for their working space. It can be like that. It may be that you're sent a form and asked to contribute to that risk assessment, and obviously that's a healthy process. So do get involved. Another sort of big issue that I think is coming up time and again when I'm talking about return to work with chapels is about mental health. And that's been a strong theme throughout all of this. Obviously, people can have difficult mental health outcomes as a result of being confined to their home. And I think there's going to be another set of potential mental health risks for people when it comes to getting used to the idea of leaving your home in circumstances where we've been being told for weeks and weeks now that it's very dangerous out there and we should stay indoors. And I think that's going to be a transition. And I think what I'm saying about mental health again is unchanged for the new situation, and this applies now and this applies in the future. The greater attention on mental health that's happening is a positive thing. I think we should be asking for things like updated training for all managers about mental health, so that they can be supportive and helpful towards their staff, and we can be encouraging members to open up about these things in the confidence that they're going to be sympathetically received by managers. And I think training is a big part of that. I think a lot of managers, to be fair to them, want to do the right thing by their staff, and it's obviously mental health is a difficult issue to deal with if you're not trained. So big skills gap, I think, at the moment, and this is a good opportunity to fill it for everybody's long-term benefit. And I think probably the last thing I was going to say is that, really, I think a lot of this is probably a bit of a moot point at the moment for most of us, isn't it? Because until there's public transport that is actually serviceable, we ain't going nowhere. And I think the other thing that, for as long as it's not operating to anything like the normal way, is the school system. And obviously, I mean, especially in my sectors, vast majority of people, members working in there are women. So this is a big concern to them. And I think I just wanted to sort of put a word in for, as trade unionists, for our sort of mindset about this. I sort of noticed that the Daily Mail's headline this morning was attacking teachers' unions for apparently refusing to allow their members to go back to work, which obviously, as we all know, that's not how it works. But just flagging that up and saying that at a time like this, trade unionists need each other. Everybody's struggle is very much the same on this. And if the teachers can't sort out safe working conditions to get back to their work, we're going to have difficulty getting back to our work. And it's highlighting that ecosystem. And I guess I just wanted to make the point that other unions have got work to do really before we can sort of seriously get to work on our project of getting everybody back safely into the workplace. So I think that's worth considering at the moment, how we respond as trade unionists to that, and maybe chapels considering reaching out in solidarity to places like the Education Union to get involved in that, and understanding the sort of holistic nature of this situation for the workforce at the moment. Unless there's any questions, I think that's probably all I wanted to say.
That's great. Thank you very much. Sorry, my dog's just started to bark. Apologies. I knew this would happen. Thank you very much, Fiona, for that. That was great. And I think a lot of those issues are going to be very common across the different sectors within the NUJ, as you quite rightly say. And what's really interesting, actually, is people are kind of moving towards trade unions, and more. We know trade union figures have gone up, so we know membership has gone up right across the different trade unions, which is really interesting too. And also very mindful of the fact that actually statistics have come out around the numbers of people that have been working, continue to work right through lockdown. Between a third and 50% of the normal working population have continued to work throughout this lockdown. So actually, even though people are at work and we're talking about returning to work, the dynamics are going to change inevitably, because there are going to be more people around, there are more people on public transport, and also there are going to be more people in the workplace as well. So inevitably that's going to cause us more concern. So thank you very much. And I think the issue around solidarity amongst trade unions is important, because we're all linked in various different ways, and it's important that we all make those links and we see those links for what they are. So thank you. Andy, would you like to go next, please?
Thanks, Caroline. So I'm Andy Smith. I work with Laura Davison in London as an organiser on newspapers, news agencies and new media. A lot of what Fiona said, as you say, is common across all the sectors. Our chapels are continuing to deal with and consider issues around furloughing and about pay cuts. Things on those fronts haven't changed, and are obviously specific to the chapels that we're dealing with. On the return to work, we obviously had a flurry of interest following Boris Johnson's rather unhelpful input on Sunday, which was clearly incredibly badly timed and I think factually incorrect on a couple of things. And I think probably the only thing I'd emphasise, as well as saying that, like Fiona, we've had a number of employers explicitly clarifying that they're not going to and don't see any way that they could get people physically back into offices anytime soon, or frankly the need for it, is to go back to the basics, which in many ways haven't changed. That, if you think about what people were being told, if you're unwell, you stay at home and you follow government advice. If you are furloughed, you stay at home and you wait for your employer to tell you what is happening with your furlough. If you have been able to work from home, as far as we understand it, the government advice and the legislation is that you still need to stay at home unless you have a reasonable excuse to leave it. And frankly, unless your employer can demonstrate a need to return to an office, I can't see any reason why you should not continue to work from home. If you are a vulnerable individual, or if you are looking after a vulnerable individual, then you still need to be communicating with your employer that there are reasons why you personally need to stay at home. And that's all of that is before you get on to the health and safety assessments about how people get into work, how people physically enter buildings. We've got a number of people working very large shared offices where there are going to be immense complications across multiple employers and thousands of people, Canary Wharf, for instance, where we're not even close to starting a conversation about how people do that. And then, collectively and individually, everybody should be given enough information to be satisfied that whatever they're being asked to do, they can do so safely. And obviously, none of that has changed since, some of the recent advice or, desire, shall we say, for change. Change will happen. Change isn't going to happen now. I think that's probably all I have to say.
That's great. Thank you very much, Andy. And some really important points raised there, particularly around health and safety concerns and welfare concerns. So we will address those as Adam is here from the Health and Safety Committee. So we will come back to some of those points. So thank you very much, Andy. Can I ask Paul, please, to be the next person?
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Seeger. I'm the National Broadcasting Organiser, which, as you can probably work out from my title, I deal with broadcasting. And so some of the big sort of employers that I deal with are the BBC, ITV, ITN, and I think since the crisis began, it would be fair to say that most of the big broadcasters have behaved very well, certainly compared to some of the horror stories I hear from other sectors. Some of the smaller broadcasters maybe not so well, but certainly the larger ones have. And since Boris's announcement on Sunday, no real shift in terms of trying to get people back to work. Currently, the BBC has 8% occupancy on average in their buildings, meaning about 92% of people are working from home. And there's really no rush to increase that. Same with the other big employers. I think the BBC have got an aspiration to get that figure from 8% to 16% by around October time, but I think they're quite conscious of the fear of the second spike. So what's the point in getting everyone back into the office, and then this second spike comes along in October when they then have to, get everyone to decamp and go back to home and issue people with laptops again. So I mean, it's particularly difficult with some of the big employers because of the number of people that, when things do get back to normal, they need to get back into lifts and things. So the BBC are working on projects like trying to just have one person in a lift at a time, which, in terms of getting hundreds of people into a large building, it would take some time. So they're in no rush to really, and home working has been, a great success. I mean, I've represented over the years many people that wanted to work from home and were told by their bosses they you wouldn't be able to do it. It's not practical to work from home. And lo and behold, here we are having thousands of people all working from home, and it's working really well. So that's one of the real positives, I think, to come out of this crisis. We have shown that home working does work. One of the big issues at the moment with the big employers is temperature testing. So the BBC are in the middle, in fact, have just completed a trial period where they're doing voluntary temperature testing in the main buildings. So in Broadcasting House in London, they've got, I haven't actually seen it, but I think it's a large machine where you stand on a cross and it takes your temperature. In some of the smaller buildings, they're talking about having handheld devices. They think it's been a great success, so they're currently in discussions this week about making it mandatory. So you wouldn't be able to go into a BBC building without having your temperature tested. If you failed, if it was deemed that you had a fever, you'd wait 20 minutes, have it tested again, and if the results were the same, you'd be sent home and wouldn't be able to return. I think it is for 48 hours. So I was quite worried that would go down badly with our members, because I thought they would see that as being an infringement on their civil liberties. But in the BBC, the feedback has been incredibly positive, hence the fact that they're now talking about rolling it out and making it compulsory. But at ITN, another one of my large employers that I represent, there has been a lot of opposition to that, and so they're going to keep it voluntary. You don't have to have your temperature tested, and they're going to be using handheld devices where you just go into an office and take your own temperature with a handheld device, and it would be up to you whether you disclosed it or not. One of the criticisms about temperature testing is it lulls people into a false sense of security. So if you think that everyone coming into the building has had their temperature tested, then you might think actually there's no chance of anyone having COVID-19, therefore you don't need to keep away from someone, maybe you're not washing your hands as much. So there is a fear that it could lull people into a false sense of security. The other big issue is the wearing of masks. The BBC have bought 180,000 masks because they were thinking that the government might make them compulsory. That hasn't happened yet, so they've now got 180,000 masks that they don't really know what to do with. So if you want to buy a mask, look on eBay. The BBC might be selling them soon. But there's kind of a dilemma there, because clearly we are being told that you need to wear a mask if you're going to be using public transport. If you're based in London, then you're probably going to be using public transport to get to work. So a lot of members in the BBC are saying, well, hang on, we expect the BBC to supply us with masks if we've got to wear one on public transport. The BBC are refusing that. Again, contrast that with ITN, who will supply their staff with masks to wear on public transport, or at least not masks, but face coverings of some description. So these things are sort of waiting to settle down, really. And I think when more and more people start returning to work, public transport clearly is going to be potentially dangerous. So I think the arguments about whether employers should supply masks we're going to hear more noise about that, I think. And I suppose the contrast to all of that, as I've just said, employers are not rushing to get people back into the offices, so people are going to continue to homework, certainly for the next few months, possibly for the rest of the year. So we're beginning to hear a bit of noise now about should people be given contributions to their utility bills, you know, heating bills, gas bills, council tax, chocolate biscuits, or whatever people are now having to buy more of or pay more towards as they're home working. And there's a real reluctance from that at the moment from the employers, because they're saying that people are generally saving money by not having to commute, spend money on petrol, so they're not prepared to start making a contribution to utility bills, although they are pointing people in the direction that you can get some money back from the HMRC if you fill in a tax return, and that's what the general consensus is at the moment. It's up to the individual to claim that money. Same thing with desk and chairs. You know, I think when people work from home to start with, people were prepared to, you know, sit on the end of a bed with a laptop and do their job as the best they could. But now we're talking about several months of that. People are saying, well, I need a desk, I need a proper chair. I mean, looking around at all your faces, it looks like people are working in various rooms. I think I can see at least one bedroom in the background. I'm looking at you, Tara Oakes. So, you know, is it the employer's responsibility to supply a proper desk and chair? They're saying no at the moment. The BBC have got a loan system where you can borrow £250 to go and spend on some furniture, but unless you've got a medical reason, an occupational health report that says you need a specialist chair and desk, people are not being supplied with those. So that's an interesting question, because if people are perched on the end of beds for the next 6 months, they probably will have a bad back, will need to go to occupational health, and then probably will be entitled to a desk and chair. But it might just be sensible for people to be supplied with the right equipment before they develop a bad back, etc. So that's it really from the broadcasting sector. As both Andy and Fiona said, there's a big overlap in a lot of the things that we're going to be saying today. So it's definitely risk assessments are an important thing, but Fiona's already touched on those, so I won't bore on about those. That's it from broadcasting.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. That's really useful, and I think the issue around prevention is really important for those of you who are health and safety reps. Even if you're not health and safety reps, health and safety and welfare is the biggest issue here, and employers seem to be ducking from their responsibilities really, and talking about things like meditation and yoga and all these kinds of things, and really individualizing the whole approach to health and safety and welfare. And I think this is a real concern, because of course the whole point of health and safety and welfare legislation, going right back to 1974, is about prevention. And I think that it's a key point that Paul has made there, and it's something that we really need to be mindful of. So thanks very much, Paul. Let's move on to Nick now. Nick, are you there?
I am indeed. I'm Nick McGowan-Lowe. I work with John Toner in the Scottish office. We work across all the different sectors, which does give us a bit of comparison. I agree wholeheartedly with what my colleagues have said. Coming back on something that Paul said, I sat in a meeting last year where a sub-editor at the Daily Record was told that she couldn't possibly be doing homeworking, and there was no way that could be made feasible for her, even though it made a family-friendly policy. And lo and behold, here we are. I wish we were having that conversation sort of a year on, where everyone is literally doing that. Across the sectors, what we're seeing, again with the newspapers, there doesn't seem to be a huge rush to go back. I believe NewsQuest may have said something quite explicit to that, and in fact the Herald and Times building has officially been moved out of, and I'm not sure if they actually have somewhere to go to yet. In what may be a masterstroke of good timing or bad timing, depending on whether you want stability or you want to negotiate the pay rate, the rental rates. The BBC and STV are both being proactive. They are the people that are looking to bring people back soonest, but very much on a phased scheme. Again, it is various proposals has to be specific authorization to come back into buildings, communal areas cut down, temperature testing at the door I've seen at an employer other than the BBC. And at the moment, so these are happening in a sort of risk assessment, even down to a sort of granular level of you can't share a pen, which is going to be a nightmare, because in my 20 years as a photographer, every bloody journalist never seemed to have a pen and had to borrow one off me. So coming down to that, car sharing and so on are going to be big problems. And I think one of the issues we have to look at for and make sure is covered by the risk assessments is the working outside the office and working in other environments, which, you know, we're still the sort of when people are at work, we have to make sure it covers that. It's also going to be interesting to see, I mean, the BBC at Pacific Quay is a huge open plan building. As Paul says, I think it's at 7% occupancy at the moment. They have the capacity for social distancing because it's huge, open plan, wide staircases. And so they can do that. The canteen is kind of, it looks very lonesome. There's a single chair at every table and lots of space around. STV is slightly different. It's a slightly narrower entrance. But what I see happening is here, I think they will come up with risk assessments which will be sufficiently tested by the times that we get the newspapers back in, so that we can actually maybe take that as a model and take that forward. The mental health, again, is going to be a big issue going forward, especially for those who are not in the office, and also those who are at higher risk of infection, who will be kept on home working. That's going to have a knock-on effect. It may feel that people who, if their colleagues are going back to the office, they feel they're left out of the loop, and how the company can, how the employer can best cope with that. The other aspect, maybe to preempt what David's going to come to next, is how this will affect freelancers. As we start to come out of the lockdown, freelancers will be seeing presumably a reduction in the money that they are getting paid. There'll be an incentive for them to go back to work, but to all intents and purposes, they're often their own in charge of their own health and safety. And I worry that there will be freelancers who feel themselves under financial pressure to work, which outweighs their gut feeling of wanting to stay safe. I genuinely don't know how we go about tackling that and how we start including that in employers' risk assessments. Okay, I think that's it, and I think everything else I was going to say was covered by the other speakers.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nick. Some really important points there, particularly around models that we can kind of test out now, and we can then perhaps use for the more difficult employers. So further on down the line, when newspapers perhaps start asking journalists to come back into the offices where some of those relationships haven't been so positive in the past, some of these model agreements that have been tested out around risk assessments might be quite useful to use. And I think that would be something that we need to be mindful of, how we can share some of this information out and around, because there's clearly some good practice, and it would be useful to be able to use some of that good practice and to be able to pass it around to places and reps where some of the practice isn't so good. So thanks very much for that, Nick. Okay, let's move on to David Ayrton now, please, David.
Hi, colleagues. I'm David Ayrton, organiser in the department covering freelance in Wales. Nick's already alluded to some of the issues facing freelancers. What I don't intend to do is repeat what other colleagues have already said. They've covered a wide range of health and safety issues. Freelancers are immediately facing important difficulties in regard to furloughing. We've had some quite good successes persuading some employers who initially were very reluctant to furlough freelancers who are on pay-as-you-earn tax arrangements. We are often looking, particularly in this situation, about employee status, where the nominal nature of the working arrangement is freelance, but in reality, it is in effect either a worker status, which is a generic term. In a more legalistic way, it's called LIMB, or employee status, where they're in effect their working arrangements are that of an employee, which involves control over their work and a mutuality of obligation, and that they can't substitute. That's called personal service. So we are pursuing some employment status cases. In regard to other freelancers, particularly sports journalists have been very, very hard hit. And as you may be aware, the new the scheme to assist self-employed is now open for applications, and all likely parties have been informed of that. All likely individuals have been informed of that. Of course, all journalists' work is not in offices, and we've had many journalists as key workers, because journalists are categorised as key workers who've been out and about all through this crisis, doing their jobs, whether that be photographers or whether that be journalists of, in word craft. I've been dealing with a very important aspect of that, which is the categorisation of those of journalists, bona fide news gatherers, as key workers, and therefore with a legitimate purpose to be out and about doing their jobs. Just as an aside, if colleagues are not already aware, maybe I'm teaching grandmas to suck eggs, so to speak. But of course, it's been very key, for instance, for photographers to cover the transgressions of social distancing in order to inform public debate and governmental action. So a key part of that for me has been liaising with the police. The police also key workers, obviously, and the journalist as a bona fide news gatherer, also a key worker. So two sets of key workers. Obviously, it's the role of the police to identify the key worker, the journalist, that they are indeed legitimate. And key to that is of course, the press card, establishing the status of a bona fide news gatherer with the UK Press Card Authority press card, which the NUJ issues to its members who are engaged primarily in news gathering, being recognised by the National Police Chiefs Council as the holder of that such a card, being recognised by the National Police Chiefs Council as a bona fide news gatherer. So this has been a very important issue for us, for the NUJ, and for that liaison with the police. Even this morning, I've been engaged with very senior police officers in the Metropolitan Police, delving more into this question of identification. This morning, a superintendent was asking me about, what about international journalists? As far as UK journalists, however, are concerned, we're covered by the UK Press Card Authority press card, which is one of the issues, one of the gatekeepers is the NUJ. I've also been dealing with issues for journalists working in relation to, just on this question, of course there have been some issues, although it's not been predominant, of police officers not recognising the essential status of the journalists. Senior officers are very much keen on getting this out to the officer on the front line and how they would engage. Of course, from our part, we have to encourage our members and journalists to approach the police officer as a key worker, as they should expect to be treated themselves as a key worker. So we've also faced an issue of journalists out working of violence and intimidation from the public. And we obviously expect...
Sorry, David, 1 minute left, please.
All right, okay. We obviously expect the police, where that's possible, to protect them from such violence. People don't like them covering their activities in the crisis. And so I'll leave it there for now. Obviously, we're open to questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, David. You've raised some really, really important issues there. And again, hopefully we'll come back to those at the end and people can ask questions and comments, because we're already getting some questions coming through here, which is great. The other thing, of course, here is around equality, because we've seen that there have been some violent acts, particularly around racist acts towards journalists out and about working. I think it was Seema Katecha, who was out in Leicester, who was doing some work and was interviewing somebody on the street and was attacked racially. So, you know, there are huge issues here for journalists, workers going out and about, freelancers going out and about, which of course is going to be even trickier now, because there are going to be more people out. So the potential for more issues to occur is there. So it's a really important area, David. Thank you very much for addressing some of those issues. Okay, so we're now moving on to Adam. Adam is the chair of the NUJ National's Health and Safety Committee, and he's just going to give us a 5-minute update around health and safety and welfare issues in relation to returning to work. Over to you, Adam.
Hang on, that's better. Can you hear me? Yes, sorry about that. If anybody is not familiar with this particular tome, and the Word copy's available in Headland House for all the officials. I suspect they're still on bookcases there and unavailable. It's a TUC guide to the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, certainly for the United Kingdom. I'm not sure whether we've got anybody here from the Republic of Ireland. But most of the regulations covered by the Health and Safety at Work Act now are actually in European directives that have been incorporated into UK law, and they apply very similarly in the Republic of Ireland. Going back to one question regarding home working, the display screen equipment regulations of 1992, as amended in 2002, talks about workstations must meet minimum requirements, which include legroom and clearances to allow postural changes, keyboards, stable and adjustable chairs, footrests if needed. Get up to speed on it, get on the health and safety courses that Caroline is running and running online. You've got to know these details to be able to challenge them, because it's there and in law. One of the huge problems that we're going to face is that the government recommendations are not consistent with the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. They are letting employers off the hook, primarily, I suspect, because those who are drafting them have been, like so many, battered into the belief over the last X many years that health and safety at work is red tape and gets in the way of business. It's actually there to protect business interests in the long term, and it's in the interests of business to observe the regulations. It will cost them money, it will save them money in the medium to long term, and save them having to pay huge insurance premiums for things that they should be doing anyway. You need to, as far as mental health is concerned, you need to be up to date with the health and safety at work stress management standards, because those implicitly cover mental health. There are very, very good resources online. They effectively or implicitly tell the employers everything that they should be identifying in risk assessments, and also the reasonable precautions that they should be putting in place. As Nick pointed out, a key factor is that this is not anything to do with workplaces, but change the terminology around places of work. Wherever work is carried out, those must be risk assessed. Generic risk assessments aren't likely to work. Employers are going to hate this because each and every one is going to have to be risk assessed individually. Where we have recognised workplaces, reps have the right to ask for risk assessments within a reasonable period of time. If their risk assessments which should have been done, 48 hours is reasonable. If they need to be done for new, then probably a working week, 5 working days, again, is reasonable. If you've got any doubts about the legal requirement, it's suitable and sufficient. Challenge it. Is the person who carried out the risk assessment qualified to do so? Has every variable been identified and eliminated? It's basic methodology, after which reasonable precautions have got to be put in place. Those are up for negotiation. After that, reps, as long as the employer knows who the rep is in line with the law and has been told, reps can carry out inspections. Inspections are not looking for trailing cables, they're actually checking whether the workstations at home meet the display equipment regs. You can do that with a quick snap on a mobile phone. Reps must let employers know that inspections are taking place. Inspections include surveys and talking to members, but the employer cannot be within earshot of a conversation or know what's there. You can then challenge the risk assessment if your inspection doesn't tally and come up with consistency. If there's anything that you have in doubt that could be a near miss as far as affecting somebody's health, safety and well-being is concerned, and record it in an incident log. Not an accident book, but an incident log, and make sure that near misses are recorded, because those need to be reviewed. And if things are going into incident
1 minute, Adam,
records,
please. 1 minute.
If they're going into incident records, then clearly the risk assessments may not be suitable and sufficient. You get into a cyclical process that goes round and round and round again until we get it right and people are looked after. We're preparing some notes on going back to work, covering points that people have taken. We have a wealth of health and safety information, which I am currently actually going through one at a time to compress the PDFs, and they will be in a Dropbox account, hopefully within the coming days. Details of the Dropbox account with the password. Caroline has everybody's email address here, I hope. Are you nodding, Caroline? Yes, thank you. And we will circulate the Dropbox address and password as soon as I've had a chance, in between trying to earn a little bit of a freelance living, to get them uploaded. So please bear with me if it takes a few days. Get to be familiar with the health and safety details from the NUJ when they're up there. Remember, risk assessments, reasonable precautions, inspections, reports and reviews. That cyclical process is vitally important. If in doubt, challenge. It requires a lot of work, it requires confidence, but we can make a difference. And if they seem inadequate, don't have any hesitation in challenging the government suggestions, because they probably aren't consistent with the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Here endeth that lesson yet again for those who've heard it for the umpteenth time in the last 2 weeks.
Thank you so much, Adam. I mean, we can't get away from the fact that health and safety and welfare is at the centre of what we're talking about here, really. It's really important to remember that employers do have responsibilities, and at the moment they seem to be ignoring a lot of those responsibilities, and they're very much individualising a lot of the issues that members have got. So thanks ever so much for that, Adam. I'm going to open it up.
Can I add one thing very, very quickly? It'll take 30 seconds. COVID is a biological agent. Biological agents are covered by regulations which are misleadingly called the control of substances hazardous to health. Substances as a word is entirely misleading, and all the health and safety executive talks about working with substances. You need to remember that this pathogen, which can be carried on our breath, is a substance, and that you and I are all substance containers. And if you remember it's a substance and that we're substance containers, you need to pick away at everything from the HSE on substances and COSH from that perspective, and only then will you start to get it right. There are inconsistencies there because Kosh says that infections passed between co-workers aren't included, but the reporting of dangerous occurrences regulation says that they are if disease results. So
Can I?
you've
Sorry,
got
I'm
to
going
know your stuff.
I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you very much, Adam. That's really useful, and I've put a link up on the chat as well for the Kosh regulations. Can I just say to everybody that the rights to access and ask for information around health, safety and welfare, whether you're in a recognised workplace, i.e. that the NUJ is recognised as the body to speak on behalf of NUJ members, or whether you're in an unrecognised workplace where you haven't got that agreement, you have rights under health and safety legislation which are contained in some particular regulations. And it's really important that you have health and safety reps in your chapels and in your branches so that you can access those rights, because if you haven't got a health and safety rep, or if you're not wearing that hat as well, then you can't access those rights. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing, and I will come back to this at the end, is we are going to be organising an online webinar. I'm not quite sure how it's going to work at the moment because there's a huge amount of information, as you've probably gathered already, around health, safety and welfare. So it's thinking about how we can possibly talk about that, discuss that and make it useful for you. But I will come back to that at the end. So can I open it up now, please, to everybody and anybody, whatever questions you want to ask. If you've got any experiences that you want to share, any comments you want to make. I have got a question already that I would like to address. Somebody's already put that on chat, Steve, I think. So Steve, would you like to go first? Would you like to ask your question about masks? Steve Bird?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been very interesting. Much appreciated. And I've already passed on the details about the regulations to the FT Chapel Committee. We've got a meeting straight after this. The return to work, the question masks is something that is bound to come up because of the commute, particularly in London. And so I was interested in the BBC's experience and especially the 180,000 masks. Whether they'll be available on eBay or not is another question. But I was interested in how the BBC is proposing to use them as sort of best practice. Just as I've got the mic temporarily, the FT has got a return sort of crisis management team in place. There's no union reps on it, but we are meeting in consultations twice weekly, actually. So we're quite involved. And the priorities that have been established where I am have been that the return will be voluntary. There's not going to be any significant return at all till September. The commitment is to follow best practice, not to follow necessarily sticking to government guidance, which I think is very sensible, given the confusion around all that. It's very interesting to hear the regulations about risk assessment, because obviously building space, lifts, toilets, shared tea points and kitchens and so on are going to be need to be scrutinised, and the safety of commuting, obviously coming back to the mask point. So it probably depends on a lot of things to do with the timescale that's being proposed by individual companies. So it'd be interesting to hear different experiences. As I said, the priority at the moment is to continue with home working for the vast majority where I am, and obviously people are very relieved to hear that. Outside of that, the whole question of work arrangements, again, it was an interesting point made about how these health, it's obvious really, but how the health conditions worsen over time. And this won't have been anticipated, I'm sure, by a lot of employers. And that really does need to be voiced loudly. We've had initial good response from the company with some equipment being distributed, but it's been on a sort of high-end production basis. Have got the good equipment, and the rest is being funneled through online physio appointments to get the equipment. So we're just pushing over that just to make sure that that's not, and there's no foot dragging over it. There is a process in place to get the equipment, which is good. And they have increased the number of hours available to talk to physio. So that's the kind of, that's a sort of snapshot really of the health and safety from our point of view. We haven't really had very many regular meetings of the Health and Safety Committee, but we are pushing for another one in the coming weeks. But thanks everybody for your input. It's been very useful.
Thanks very much, Steve, for that. It was a really useful update, and I think really important to share the experiences, particularly around the issue of health and safety committees. They seem to have just kind of disappeared for the moment. And of course, all these issues are health and safety and welfare related. Everything you're talking about here, mental health, you know, all the stuff around how we're working, all this kind of stuff is it should be discussed through your health and safety committee. So really important. Thank you, Steve. Did anybody want to answer the question about the masks from the BBC, how they're going to be distributed?
Yeah, I can come back on that. So I think that the masks were they're sort of high spec masks, the kind that you could wear if you went into a hospital to do a story, and I think they were bought just in case the government's guidelines or recommendations were that they were meant to be worn in offices for social distancing or whatever. And obviously that advice from the government hasn't come. The government recommendations now are just, I think, to wear face coverings on the underground, which is not quite the same as wearing a mask. So I think the BBC are not going to distribute them for people just travelling on the underground. They're going to keep them for if things get worse and they need them for going into hospitals and things, or if the government legislation recommendations do change that masks need to be worn everywhere.
Thanks very much, Paul. I hope that's kind of given you a bit more information, Steve. Not access to, but hopefully gives you a little bit more of an idea about you know, what you can do with it, really. So anybody else like to ask any more questions or share any more experiences? I think it's really important that you talk to each other and tell us what you're doing. Anybody else like to say something? Morel, please go ahead.
Hello, Morel from STV here. I've got a question. Maybe Nick, you might be able to answer this one. It's just something that has been discussed as a potential thing that might be brought in here. I'm part of a core team of people that's still in the office. There's about maybe 20 of us, and it's in the government guidance was in order to mitigate you know, people being too close to each other. They might introduce a system where there's kind of like fixed teams or partnering within the office. So there's like an A team and a B team, and you only work with your set team, so you're not mixing with too many people. I'm just wondering if that's been discussed anywhere else, or if the BBC are doing something like this. I heard they might be doing something where people are coming in only part-time, so they're not mixing with too many different people every day. I'm just trying to kind of gather a bit more information about that and how it could possibly work for us.
I know a little. I think Paul might know more than I do, but I believe that idea has come from government consultations, and I believe the BBC are looking at it. I might be wrong on the second part. Paul, do you know any more?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we had a meeting on Tuesday, and they are looking at all options, and that is one of the options that they're looking at. But that it's only at that stage yet. The BBC have got like a 3-stage process in terms of getting people back at work, and we're at stage 1 at the moment. The basic process of having most people work from home, and they're now working on a stage 2 plan, and that is one of the options they're looking at. But whether they decide to go down that route, I don't know. It's too early to say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Richard Palmer, you've got a question. Would you like to ask it?
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, I just wondered whether there is any legal right to have a workplace health and safety committee. I asked that because we had one when Richard Desmond owned the Express titles, but when Reach took us over, they said they've never had health and safety committees. That wasn't how they operated. They've got a health and safety officer who I think he's based in Liverpool. I'm not even sure. I've never met him or her. And we've been pressing them for months, if not a couple of years now, to set up a health and safety committee. We've got a health and safety rep on the Express titles. We've also got a health and safety rep on the Mirror side of the building where we don't have recognition. The head of HR is not saying no, she's just stalling really and saying, I need to think about the terms of reference for that committee and how it would operate. But they've been saying it for 6 months at least now. Is there any ammunition we could use to force them to set up a health and safety committee?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, it's okay. Can I answer it first, Adam? Because I've got the regulation. You under the Safety Reps and Safety Committee regulations, 1977, and I've put the link up on the chat. Health and safety reps have more rights than any other rep to request all sorts of things, including under Regulation 8. You have the right to request the setting up of a health and safety committee, and what you have to do is you have to write to the to your employer. I would make reference to the regulation. So have a look at the Safety Reps and Safety Committee regulations 1977. Make a reference to the specific bit in it, and you have a legal right to set up a health and safety committee. Once you've requested it, the employer has got to do it. That's their legal duty under those regulations. There's also really good, that the other points you made about reference points and about how the committee should be set up, it's all laid out in that regulation, who should sit on the committee, how often it should be run, all those kinds of things are all in there to give you guidance. But we are running some health and safety training coming up, and actually, you know, this is a big issue, so I will put that on the agenda to run that, specifically to look at the setting up of health and safety committees. Adam, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Quickly about REACH, at the last year's corporate AGM for REACH, we made points that the head of HR at REACH was actually endangering their chief executive and the board by her ignorance of health and safety at work regulations. We found a sympathetic friend in the head of health and safety at the main print works that they have in East London, who we were trying to follow up, and unfortunately in the chaos I managed to lose his contact details. So if there's any way of finding out the name and address, we will be back in touch. He said he was open to meetings and to taking it further, and seemed in sympathy with our approach, especially towards mental health and stress, and gave me the impression he'd had his own frustrations with his colleagues in HR.
Thanks very much, Adam. That's really useful. There was somebody, I think it's Alan Rawlinson. You're here, aren't you, Alan? Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Caroline. Hi, yeah, it's just a quick question about risk assessments. I mean, at LexisNexis, there's no rush for us going back to work because our office in London is shut, and the MD said only this week that he doesn't see us going back to the office anytime soon, and possibly as early as next summer. But obviously we're talking about risk assessments. Is there a specific COVID-19 risk assessment that people can use? Because obviously it would be consistency, I think, would be key if everyone is using the same risk assessment. I can't see one on the HSE website, so I just don't know if anyone knows there is one.
Adam, would you like to answer that?
Fundamentally, there isn't, and there mustn't be. If we start, generic health and safety risk assessments are a nightmare because so many of us, especially in journalism, work in unorthodox places of work. Shift patterns, the buildings that we're in, hot desking, all of those are inappropriate for generic risk assessments. So again, it is trying to identify in each and every situation where somebody may potentially be exposed to this virus and other people as substance containers breathing over you, and the virus staying on surfaces, whether they're hard or whether they're fabric. So wherever we're working, individual places of work probably need to be risk assessed, and the basics of looking for the surfaces where they may be or where people may come into contact. We're dealing at the moment with microphone safety and putting some notes together for broadcasters where people are standing 2 meters apart from interviewees. They're shoving boom mics in front of one person and then the other, and actually looking at making sure that that's considered, and the reasonable precautions including measures about changing and cleaning windshields and being able to spray them between interviews. It comes back to that sort of detail and getting away from the generic.
There are some good examples, though, of templates of the kinds of things that you could be asking for when it comes to risk assessments around COVID-19. And there are some really good risk assessments that have been done by some of the education unions, actually, which could be transferred into the work that you do. So it might be the National Education Union, for example. They've got some really good guidance on the kinds of things that you would want to see on risk assessments, specifically around COVID-19. Now, some of it will be relevant, some of it won't be relevant, obviously, because it's specifically for education. But what it does do is it gives you things to think about. So have a look at that, because I think it is important not to have, for employers not to have generic risk assessments. But of course, you want to be you want to be having a discussion with them and also challenging them and scrutinizing them on the kinds of things that they should be including on risk assessments. So therefore, you need a bit of a checklist and a bit of an idea about what you need to be looking for. So one of the things that I will do is at the end of this meeting today is I will look for some templates for you, specifically around COVID-19, to just give you a few ideas, a bit of a checklist, so you've got something to go through to give you an idea. So I think we've got somebody else who would like to ask a question. Richard, did you want to ask another question?
No, I'm fine, thanks. That was my main one.
Oh, right, sorry. Okay, thanks, Richard. Tara, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, hi. Thank you to everyone. That was really interesting and very useful. Firstly, I just wanted to speak to Morel's point about A team and B team, because we actually do have that in place at Reuters right now. We have it across the news agency, but I work specifically for Reuters TV, so it might be a bit relevant for you in terms of STV. It works quite well. What I would say is that it has in some cases made it more difficult for people to get their leave approved because we can't mix the teams. This is especially overnight for the night teams, so our night editor has been having some difficulties in that area, despite us otherwise being encouraged to take leave so it doesn't build up for the end of the year. Otherwise, I mean, we are quite distant in terms of the desks, but during the team handover, because it is a 24-hour news operation, there is, the slight risk of cross-contagion. There is one person there overnight handing over from team A to team B, and likewise team B to team A. Otherwise, I think it's worked quite well. Just personally, I I felt like I might have symptoms the other week, and they took me off my whole shift pattern and as well the night editor I've been working with. So it was a sort of contained group. Turned out I didn't have the coronavirus, so lucky me. But otherwise, it seemed to sort of have this contingency in place. We also have it worldwide, I believe. We definitely have it in France as well. Colleagues who have got the coronavirus there, they've lifted the entire B team or A team from the office across services. So they do seem quite committed to it, and it has seemed to be working quite well, other than the leave issue. Otherwise, I posted it in the chat, and it was great to hear about the DSC, the display screen equipment guidance, about adjustable chairs. But I wanted to know both, how strong is this legal obligation in terms of what they can supply? Because, as Paul pointed out, here I am representing members who are having to work from their bedrooms. These are specifically a lot of our younger members living in shared housing, shared accommodation, who are less likely to have the occupational health notes. They're younger, they're less likely to have back problems, but they are still at risk of developing them. So I wanted to get a bit more clarity about what we can ask for universally, so it isn't just our older members who have the doctor's notes and have more of a confidence to ask for these things being permitted to have office chairs and desks delivered or expensed, and whether anyone's had any luck with that in any of the other chapels, newsrooms and so on.
Great, thanks Tara. I think you've raised a lot of important points there. Georgie, would you like to just comment on that, because I noticed you put something in the chat. What did you use to try and persuade them to start thinking about this? What kind of arguments did you use?
Well, we're having a lot of difficulty at national level at JPI Media. They are very reluctant to talk to us at the moment. They haven't allowed us to have any meetings between, normally myself as group chair and the officials would meet with the editor-in-chief, the head of HR and the editorial lead for HR. Our quarterly meeting was due in April. It was cancelled. And they've refused requests so far for other meetings, but we're hopeful we might get one next week. So it has meant we're doing everything by letter, which is very slow. We write to them, maybe a week goes by, we chase them up. It's so often the points we've raised, especially at the start, were superseded by the time they'd even replied to us. But on the health and safety side, we've been trying to argue around getting a home working allowance to help with utilities, but also the access to the £150 that they usually give if you opt to become a home worker. They're saying they will only make it available if you become a permanent home worker. And I'm aware from talking to my local editor that there are now some people starting to express an interest in that. Obviously, we've all had the opportunity to try it, and some people have found they actually much prefer it to being in the office. So those people presumably will be allowed to access the funding once they switch, but so far we've not been able to get it for everybody. I'm aware of one member who has developed locally in my chapel in Leeds, has developed tendinitis and was given permission to go to the office to get some more of her kit. But basically her dad's had to fashion her a desk out of some reinforced cardboard to put over this little ledge that she's been resting her laptop on. So I think I'm having heard about other companies where people have medical notes, maybe considering it a bit differently. I'm thinking about seeing whether she might be a bit of a test case for us, and where people have a medical note, will they let them access that funding? Because I think that's a very different place to, I mean, I would much rather everyone was allowed to get kit if they need it. I think if people are demonstrating already that they're getting physical issues from it, the company does have that duty. So I'm going to go back to them and see if we can push that a bit. We're waiting on a reply about the home working allowance in the letter that they haven't answered yet. So I think we just keep chipping away. Locally yesterday as well, I had a meeting with the local reps and our editor for the Yorkshire region, just to ask about how they plan to consult the union. Didn't seem like they'd really thought that through. So definitely worth reps in workplaces starting to sound people out, even if the return to offices might be a long way off. I followed it up with a note just pointing to the government guidance. I don't know if people have looked at any of the COVID secure guidance, just stressing there that they have an obligation to consult with unions. Where there's not a union, employee representatives, that people out on the ground are best placed to understand how they can work safely. So I've tried to be quite kind of nice in this first approach and get them to cooperate. We've asked for a COVID secure committee for Yorkshire, because a bit like Richard mentioned at Reach, the health and safety structure is really vague at JPI Media. So we've said there should be a Yorkshire committee set up with this as a specific focus. We would like 6 NUJ or employee representative seats on that, and then the company can obviously select people. So I'll hopefully be able to report back in a fortnight on whether we've made any progress there. I think they'll probably try to dodge it, but then I can go back with some of the legislation instead and kind of step it up a bit and say, well, yeah, you don't really have a choice. We were just being polite and asking nicely. But yeah, it's pretty frustrating. I think the other useful thing actually that I spotted in the COVID secure stuff the government put out is they expect employers to publish all of their risk assessments on their websites. So I guess that might mean the intranet. So again, that's something useful that I'm planning to push them on, because they the initial impression I got is they're going to just do it all behind the scenes and then publish and just tell everyone when they've got the plan. And I've been kind of pushing that actually we need to be involved while they make the plan, not just kind of a token, here it is at the end. So that's really useful as well. If they're maybe not sharing information, they should be publishing it for all of the staff to see, not just any health and safety reps. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at JPI Media. Frustrating as usual.
Georgie, thank you for that update. Yeah, I mean, lots and lots of issues and lots to think about there. I think in particular, I was just going to talk about, you mentioned the COVID-19 regulations, which are great. I was also going to talk about the safety reps and safety committee regulations. Again, those of you that know me, I'm always banging on about those regulations because we don't use them enough. Fiona, I'll come to you in a second, sorry. Under regulation 4 and 4A, health and safety reps have the right to raise potential issues. And this is really important because potential issues are those issues that may well kind of turn up later on down the line, because this is about prevention. So if we can get evidence, and I think the point that Georgie made there about the test case is really important. If we can find evidence where people have had upper limb disorders, have had carpal tunnel, have had all sorts of issues related to using a PC without having a proper assessment, we can use that evidence to say, well, actually, you need to do a proper assessment. You need to do a risk assessment. These things need to be addressed like this. Georgie, I hope you don't mind me mentioning as well, a really good tactic, which I've picked up from you over the years, is that you don't wait for an employer. You don't kind of go into an employer and say, these are the problems that we've got. You actually go in and say, these are the problems that we've got, and this is how we think you should be solving them. So I think it's a really good technique, and I think it's one that we should be using more. If we think people have got problems working on this equipment at home, what do we want the employers to do? What's the equipment that they need? When do they need it? All those kinds of things. How much does it cost? If we can do the work and make it easier for employers, then employers are more likely to actually do it and less likely to actually challenge us. So I think that's a really good point, Georgie. Fiona, sorry, you wanted to come in on that as well.
I was just going to make a little point that just struck me whilst Virginia was talking about all the amazing work that they're obviously doing up there. But it was just the point about the £150 being available to permanent home workers. And what really struck me with that, I've got a bit of I'm getting a little bit of a sort of like, radar going off every time people are talking about, the concept of this maybe turning into permanent home working, because I'm sure for a lot of people that would be fantastic. But for a lot of people that would really not be fantastic, and especially those who are in poor quality housing. A lot of people, especially in London, younger entry-level workers are in house shares. Lots of people splitting off the broadband in there. You've probably only got a very limited amount of private space, and those people are not even going to be considering the possibility of permanent home working, and they're probably the people most in need of adaptations at the moment. So I was just sort of, I think I was just sort of wanting to sort of flag that point that, the home working that's been like it's been quite a nice thing for a lot of people. I am getting feedback from probably some of our slightly worst paid members in particular, and that just looked to me like a process with 150 quid that's really cutting off the people in worse need from the funding that they need to adapt their workstation. That really struck a bum note with me.
Thanks very much, Fiona, for that. Thank you, Nick, for your contribution on the chat as well. Can I go to Mel? Mel has already indicated he wants to go, then Lawrence, and then Paul. Unless, Paul, it was about this particular issue? No, okay. So, Mel, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Basically, I'm in a situation where most of the staff are furloughed, and they'll be coming off furlough in a phased process. What I'm worried about is that there'll be a repeat of what happened when people were initially put on furlough, which is those retained staff that carried on working. They incidentally have taken a very large wage cut, but that's another point. But to stick to the point in hand, those people that were retained were heavily overworked, and as the FOC and health and safety officer, I did collate all of the stuff and present that to management, and management, without involving the union as they should have done, did actually seek to address that, and eventually there has been some progress, not progress I would have completely liked, but to get to the point with the phased return of further staff, more staff, once more staff will be coming off furlough. How can I make the company respond to my in treaties about risk assessments. So I've actually emailed them saying, we've already had significant health and safety consequences last time. It's going to happen again. You're obligated to do a risk assessment here, and they're just completely ignoring what I'm saying. What do I do next?
Thanks very much, Mel. I think Andy's going to reply to this. Andy?
Hi, Caroline. It was actually, I was going to respond further to the whole workstation assessment business, but on this, I mean, I can talk to Mel, but my first instinct would be to start talking to members about the pressures they are under, and if necessary, get them to start recording the hours they're doing. I think you don't really have much leverage in terms of complaining about overwork unless you have evidence of overwork. If need be, you can then take that the stage further of starting to get people to essentially work their hours. But I think the first step would be to talk to members about the pressures they're putting under individually, so that you can provide that collective overview to the management as to what they're asking of their staff. And if you put it in terms that demonstrate that the workloads are unreasonable for the staffing levels that they are putting in place, then they will, you know, hopefully respond.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you very much.
If I could very briefly go back to the workstation issue.
Yes, of course you can, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was only, I've been disappointed by the number of employers who have done even cursory assessments of people's working conditions from home. That this distinction that George was raising about permanent as opposed to temporary, I think is a false one. That what we are talking about is a distinction between the choice to work from home and the requirement to work from home. That employers are requiring us to work from home because we do not have a choice. And that should be the distinction that's being made. But though I understand and agree with Tara in terms of raising this collectively, it may be that the only way to get companies to move and do something for everybody that asks is to, as others have said, concentrate on the individuals. But to get them to do a display screen equipment assessment, that the HSE has a self-administered form that you will, you know, you can simply get the company to send out to people for them to fill in, for then somebody to respond to concerns that individuals raise about their own workstation setups, which will give them a, you know, they will at least then be either in a position of responding to individual concerns people are raising, or choosing to ignore those concerns. And COVID aside, there is the underlying duty of care of employers to ensure that you have a safe working environment. And although, as I'm sure Caroline will tell you, all of the legislation is couched in terms of what is reasonably practical, I don't think it's unpracticable to look at somebody who doesn't have a desk and realize that they need a desk. If they can't provide you with a desk, then presumably they need to provide you with other types of work that don't require you to work from a desk. But I think the starting point is to identify the problem.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. I think evidence is really important here, because most employers will automatically back you back if you haven't got the evidence. So it's about collecting your evidence when you go, so that you've actually got something to demonstrate and show them, you know, why you're arguing for what you're arguing for. Really important point that. Lawrence, did you want to pick up on the point that you started in chat, or do you feel satisfied with the response you got on chat?
Hi, Caroline. Yeah, if I could just expand on that. So my question is about best practice for communicating with all staff members, not just members of the union. We're a very large company, maybe 1,000+ colleagues at our HQ here in Abingdon, and you know, only some of those are members of the union. We're in regular contact with those over email. but our collective agreement specifies that we're only supposed to use the internal email and intranet for inviting people to union meetings. And we're getting a hell of a lot of queries from non-members. And obviously, you know, there's only so much we can do for them, but I think it would be really useful if we could communicate with all staff, you know, using the intranet or using the internal email system. And I was just wondering about how to go about gaining agreement from HR and management on that. Thanks.
Does anybody want to reply to that? Does anybody want to has a point on that? Something anybody would like to say? I think the point that was made in by Nick. Oh, Adam, would you like to say something?
Yeah, very quickly. In response to Paul, the documents on the Dropbox account.
Sorry, Adam. Could you respond? We're just responding to Lawrence at the moment. Would it be? Did you want to respond to Lawrence?
No, I was going to go back to Paul. Sorry.
Okay. Lawrence, I was just going to say that I know Nick has given you some advice, and I think that's quite good advice. Actually, relying on an employer's system is probably not always the best way, because obviously they'll be able to see anything that you're putting on there. So you're limited as to what you can say if you're using an employer's system. So if you can get personal emails, I think that's probably the best way forward for you, really. Or WhatsApp groups. I think that was the other thing that's been mentioned here, because I know in some organisations WhatsApp groups are used to keep in contact with members. Has anybody else got any other ideas? Fiona, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the personal email stroke WhatsApp thing was sort of what I was going to flag up a couple of years ago over at Penguin. Random House, we almost got derecognised. It didn't happen in the end, but we briefly were, and what we did was we sort of used our last sort of shout to email all of the members in the workplace over the workplace systems to say what was happening and that we needed people's personal contact details, and if they wanted us to stay in touch with them, then they would need to send those, and we were absolutely inundated. So, and it's not quite as urgent a situation as that, but it might just be worthwhile saying to the company, look, you know, these are unusual circumstances. We want one email shot out, please, just to make sure that everyone is able to get in touch with us and have our protection and talk to us and things. But I think and use that to get it off the system, I guess, if you possibly can. You know, you're not going to get everyone to send their stuff, their details in, but you know, you can't you can't handhold them all into it. If they want to hear from us, they don't want to hear from us. But I think it would be good to maybe move it off the work system, and then once you're off there, it's going to be much easier to organise.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Really important points. Paul, Paul Breeden, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks to you and all the officials who I know are probably putting in incredible hours at the moment, and everyone else who's contributed. This has been a really useful meeting. I've made loads of notes, and I'm going to send them out to lots of different people. Slightly random points. On the police, I've been in touch with our local force, and they're very cooperative, and they recognised the National Police Chief's guidance and so on, and said they briefed all their officers about that journalists were key workers and what their rights were. That may have happened, but of course the people you're most likely to meet when you're out photographing people in a park or whatever are PCSOs, and the message doesn't appear to have reached them, which is unfortunate. So that's something perhaps we could press forces on and be aware of. Another thing I've noticed that really worries me, I mean, we talked about threats and even violence to our members out and about. There's something else that really worries me, which is the extreme scepticism that some members of the public have towards the media now. I think of two instances. One locally, the Bristol Live, the Reach website, carried pictures of a Bristol pub that was serving drinks through its door to people outside. and caused quite a crowd on the harbour side. And that's obviously a story. But surprisingly, the reaction to that by a lot of people commenting online, this is quite a few people, was that they didn't believe the pictures. People were saying to each other that the pictures of pints of beer had been photoshopped onto these photos, and they were disbelieving. And these were press photos, and it took quite a lot of convincing that these photos were real. And there was another similar instance. People may have seen it. It was certainly on the NUJ Facebook group of a picture a professional photographer took of crowds on Brighton seafront. This is a couple of weeks ago, and people were saying vehemently that this was an old photo and that it couldn't possibly have been taken recently for various reasons. And I mentioned that because that picture came from a Bristol agency, Southwest News, and their picture editor, who's a member, had to go online and post the file data to show that the picture had been taken when he said it was taken. This is really a point. I just think we need to be aware of our health and safety when we're out and about, because there is, in these times, there's not much we can do about it except argue the case. But people are very, very sceptical of the media and what they're being told. One final point, a bit more positive. In Bristol, we've found a lot more interest in meetings since we started doing them on Zoom. This is a branch point rather than a chapel one, but we're hoping to use this to recruit. And it happens that in the southwest, we're the biggest branch and almost the only one that has a large membership. And we've just been told that there's no longer any branches in Devon or Cornwall, and we've been asked to take on those members there. So we've actually got a lot of enthusiastic members in Bristol, and what we're hoping to do, if we can get the membership list, obviously there's a data protection issue, but if we can get lists for people in various areas, because we know that people are joining up, and I know recruitment's been pretty strong in the last few months, we're going to give individual members an area, for example, Plymouth, where there's no branch, there's no organisation, there's no chapel, and try to talk to each member there and see what they want to do. And the aim would be to hold a Zoom meeting for people in Plymouth, people in Exeter, whatever, and use that as a recruitment tool and an organising tool. But we've noticed generally that when we're holding, we actually held a regional meeting as well on Zoom with Tim Lizard, our NEC rep, and the interest is really good. So we're actually taking advantage of this situation. It's working well. But thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Paul, for the overview around some of the issues that you and your members have got, certainly out and about, but also the very positive kind of example there, which I think is really important to remember, that we have got opportunities here to organise. We've got opportunities to reach out to people that perhaps wouldn't have had access to the union before, and I think that's really important to remember. We're seeing virtual branch meetings now with 50+ members coming to, whereas before we might have only had 9 or 10, which is absolutely brilliant. And I think we need to build on that. We need to mobilise that, and we need to find ways of being able to capture that and turn that into an organising opportunity to tackle some of the issues that all of you've talked about today. And also, I've seen I've been involved in other organising opportunities with other unions where we've run training sessions, and then they've kind of added on an organising meeting at the end of it to try and again encourage more people to come along and to offer something to members around a training issue that's specific for them at the moment. So it could be around health and well-being, it could be about health, safety and welfare, something like that, because there are so many issues that members have got that they want addressed that can be addressed in a variety of different ways. So I think really, really good example there, Paul. Thank you very much. Now it's 12:30, we've come to the end. David, do you want to make one final point then before we
extremely finish? Brief. In regard to the officer at the local level, the police officer, I think it's useful to advise members to carry the guidelines from the National Police Chiefs Council, which is on the NUJ website and which was made in consultation with the NUJ, alongside their press card, and just to reiterate to them that they are one key worker talking to another key worker, not to be recalcitrant but to be firm, that this is the National Police Chief's guidance, show the officer that, if he or she won't comply, in a very polite way, ask them for their number. I'll leave it at that, but if you want to talk to me later, Paul, please feel free.
Great, thank you very much, David. Really important points there, and thank you everybody for your contributions today. Thank you for attending this meeting. My name is Caroline Holmes. I'm the Programme Coordinator for the NUJ Trade Union Training Programme. If you have any ideas, if you have any kind of concerns and issues that you think could be addressed through training, then please do email me. You've all got my email. I'm currently putting on some online training. I've got the first stage 1 next week. We're piloting it, and I'm going to put on specifically put on a health and safety webinar, because there are so many health and safety and welfare issues where we're going to look at the rights of a health and safety rep in a recognised and an unrecognised workplace. We will talk about the role of safety committees, how you set them up, the functions of them, all those kinds of things. So please do feed back to me any issues, concerns, comments that you've got about training that you would like to see us putting on. We'd be very grateful to have your feedback. We will be having another one of these in 2 weeks' time. Again, you will get an invitation out in the next week. And it will be themed. It will be a themed one like this around a particular issue that's important to you and your members at the time. So thank you very much for attending. Stay safe, stay well, and it's been really nice to see you all. If you want to unmute yourselves before you go and just say goodbye, it is nice to hear everybody's voices. So please do, and I'll say goodbye to you all.
Bye.
Lovely to see you
Caroline.
all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Goodbye from Derek.
Bye, Derek. Take care.
Derek.
And thank you.
Pleasure. Good to see you. Bye. Bye, David. Take care. Bye, Alan. Lovely to see you.
Bye, Caroline.
Bye, Mark. Take care. Really good to see you.
See you soon.
Look after yourself. Bye.
Bye.